My dear chess friends, this is FideMaster Viktor Neustroyev. Thank you for joining our webinar today. We are going to talk about the queen sacrifice for two minor pieces. Okay, please let me know whether the sound and video quality is good. Yeah, okay. Yeah, it seems to be fine. Okay, so is it okay here? Is it okay everywhere? Because I'm streaming it on Chessland's YouTube channel as well as on Twitch. I also stream this event on Facebook, but I do not look for your comments on Facebook. So I'm mainly looking at three different sources: YouTube, Chessland's website, and can you please double check again if the sound is good here? Sound and video quality. Okay, so it looks like this stream was disconnected for a while, but now it should be fine. Can you please double check if everything is good? And let me know in the chat, please. Oh my, okay. Okay, yes, we are back. Sorry, there was a small disconnection. Okay, so we are talking about the queen sacrifice for two minor pieces, but before we continue with it, you can take a look at this picture. This is a new poster that I decided to add. Who are these people? Who knows? Who can guess? Okay, so waiting for your, okay, lost. Yeah, so this guy is Mikhail Tal. Who is he playing with? Who is this guy? Okay, yes, this is young Bobby Fischer, exactly. And this guy is also famous, but unfortunately I don't know, I don't remember his name. If you know, just tell me. Okay, looks like you don't know. That's why let's continue with our topic. So we are going to talk about the queen sacrifice for two minor pieces. And sometimes two minor pieces are enough to compensate the queen, sometimes not. How to realize where, in which positions it's okay to sacrifice the queen for two minor pieces, and in which it's not enough. Because usually the approximately equal sacrifice is when the queen is sacrificed for three pieces. For example, it often happens in Sicilian defense. Well, I know some lines in Dragon, in other Sicilian positions, it's also a possibility. So when to sacrifice the queen? Well, who can tell me? What are these conditions that allow us to sacrifice the queen for two minor pieces? What extra should we get to make this work and at least get a compensation for the queen? So first of all, well, the queen is approximately equal to three pieces, and who is better, the queen or three minor pieces, depends on the concrete position. However, the sacrifice of the queen for two minor pieces makes sense. When? If some of the conditions are met. What conditions I'm talking about? So, for example, when in addition to these two minor pieces, you get at least one pawn, when you have a long-term attack on the enemy king that provides you with initiative, which may compensate um, some of the material that you give up by exchanging your queen for two minor pieces. In case if we create a far advanced passed pawn and the enemy queen struggles fighting against this passed pawn, or in case if in our position there are no weaknesses or almost no weaknesses and our king, this is important, is well covered. So your opponent can take advantage of having the queen if your king is really weak. If the king is covered well, then his active queen is not as good as it can be. So the queen is really dangerous when it attacks the king which is exposed. Also, when we have a possibility of coordinate our knight and bishop and initiate a double check with the bishop and the knight simultaneously, we can convert such a type of an advantage into something extra. We can get some extra benefits based on it. Sometimes it is possible to sacrifice the queen positionally, I mean with no tactics, with no concrete play, in order to provoke our opponent to make a mistake. But this mainly happens when we play against a player who is not experienced and well, who is, I mean, who is maybe lower rated and is likely to make these mistakes with his queen. So I'm going to illustrate some of these examples today because we have 3 games to analyze. So I think that we continue this stream on all platforms. However, I'm not sure how good it is. It also works on Twitch. So guys, if you think that if you experience troubles on YouTube, you can go to Twitch. But actually, I think that the best idea for us is to do a Zoom meeting next time and stream from Zoom to Chesslands, for example, or to some other platforms. Okay, so first the game I would like to discuss is the game played by Milka Babatsov and Mikhail Tal. This time Mikhail Tal was playing with black pieces and he sacrificed the queen. So it was King's Indian, d6, f3. This line is called Semish variation, castle, knight g2, and well, one of the options is to play e5, and you know there is a second option, c5. Both lines are playable. Bishop a3. Then, well, if he takes here, the line transposes to Dragon Sicilian. But knight bd7 was played, queen d2, a6, white castles queen side, which is quite common in Semish variation. Queen e5, they move their king to the b1 square in order to maybe play through the c file, but it seems that black are a little bit faster with their queen side attack on the enemy king, and here black continues with b5. The pawn is not hanging because the queen is the defender. So what would you suggest for white in this position? Who can guess? So c takes b4. What does it mean? It's c takes b5. C takes b5, a takes b5, and a2 becomes under the pressure. Once black plays b4, the a2 is lost, and that's it. Anything else? Okay, checking your comments here. Okay, knight c1, knight b3. It's quite a clever idea to play this move, but I think that may not work because of b4. And then once the queen goes back, they can pressure the b3 knight as well. Well, knight c1 actually looks good. It's definitely a possibility. What else? I wonder why no one suggested such a move like knight d5, because knight d5 is very common. The queen is hanging, and once queen takes here, it's knight e7. That's why if black doesn't want to lose, they have to play one certain move in this position. What do you think? Which move I'm talking about? Am I talking about queen d8, which does protect on e7, or it's something else? Looks like in this position, when Mikhail Tal played b5, he definitely saw knight d5. It wasn't a surprise for him, but I'm sure he prepared a certain continuation for this move, which Milka Babotsov wasn't ready for. So how would you continue in this case? Okay, so thank you for your suggestions. So queen d8, definitely no. Queen d8, then it's knight f6. So if you take with the knight, it's d takes c5 and you lose a pawn. Let's say bishop takes, but it's still d takes c5. And after d takes c5, bishop takes on c5. Your knight is pinned. So queen d8 loses a pawn with no compensation. That's why here Tal decided to take on d5. So c takes d5 was a possible idea. Then, for example, the game could continue with queen d2, rook d2, and the position becomes approximately equal. But white wanted to play for a win, so they took the queen, and they evaluated this position to be slightly better for white. But it's actually approximately equal. Why it is approximately equal? First of all, knight e3 is a tempo gaining move. Rook goes here, and knight c4. How to play? Okay, so while you're thinking how to play in this position for white, let me show you something here else. So here Mikhail Tal was hoping that he has a very strong attack on the enemy king by doing this piece's activity. Once the b file opens, then there is a pressure on b2. Also, there will be the pressure on b2 if the knight goes to c4. So after rook c1, knight c4, and if they move with the queen, so for example, that was a possibility, then c takes d4, and here black together with two minor pieces gets two extra pawns. So he is completely fine. This is the threat. Of course, they play this move, but then knight d5, and looks like there will be long-term initiative and potentially the pressure on the enemy king, because every time b3 is played, it exposes the king's position a lot. Okay, so instead of doing queen e1, you may suggest that queen c7 is a good move. Well, it's definitely a move that deserves attention, but doesn't it seem that the queen is trapped? For example, rook goes here, and then rook b7 is a threat. So, for example, I don't know, rook g4 with the pawn, rook b7, queen c6, and c takes d4, and then d3 is a threat, knight e5 is a kind of a threat. So it seems that the queen is in a difficult situation. That's why here White decided to sacrifice the exchange. And now it's actually not two minor pieces, but a rook and a bishop. So this bishop and this rook and one more pawn versus queen, which is actually approximately equal. I'm not sure if you remember, but maybe 2 years before I was doing webinar where I was covering such a imbalance when rook, bishop, and the pawn compensated the queen. So here White realized that he is already in trouble and he is looking for some defensive play because these pieces are passive, while here Black is about to activate the rook with this move and pressure b2. So knight c1, rook b8. They take on c4, but d4 becomes vulnerable, and it does make sense to take this pawn right away. However, well, bishop d4, in my opinion, is the best move. After this, the bishop goes back, and then it's knight b6 and c4. However, Mikhail Tal played knight b6 right away. The bishop goes here, and then he does bishop b4. The best way here to continue was to, well, to try knight e2, which would provoke Black to play which move? What do you think? Well, bishop c3 is a blunder. c4 does make sense, but what if they take our bishop? So then we take the enemy bishop, but okay, c4, knight takes here, we take here, they take on b3 with their knight, and I think they are fine. So guys, I'm looking for your other suggestions. Well, okay, so Brian, let me show you what you suggest. I actually don't think it works. So knight d4, you take here, you do this, then knight c4 at the very end, and what? So I can just successfully move the queen. Where to? Let's say to this position. You have to defend with this move, but I don't care. Let's say I capture the other pawn. So where is your benefits here? So c4 is definitely a mistake. Okay. Yeah, okay, so after 92, c4 is definitely a mistake. What else do you suggest? Knight on c4. Well, knight on c4 looks good, but then okay, the queen is hanging, so probably they continue with queen c7 move, right? With queen c7 move, yes, they continue with queen c7 move. I don't think that this makes any sense because of king c2. The rook is hanging after that. So bishop e6 seems as a must. And in this position, it's knight d4 first. Knight goes there. I go here. So You take, I take, and it seems to be okay. So rook c8. I think white is completely fine here. So after knight e2, the best move is to capture on b2 right away. Because if the king takes, it's knight c4 check. And we win the queen. If the king doesn't take, then later we go back and play c4. So anyway, that was the best way. Black made a very significant mistake. They played this move. Why this is a mistake? Well, it is a mistake because this move is a bit passive and the queen on d2 still falls under the attack of knight c4 and so on. So the bishop goes here. Knight e2 was played and this time c4 works perfectly well. Bishop c2. Now your turn. So imagine you are Mikhail Tal in this position. You probably know that Mikhail Tal was a master of sacrifices, which sometimes were unsound, but in this position, I'm not asking you to obligatory find a sacrifice, but find such a move which allows you to succeed with the attack. So which move I'm talking about? So black is objectively winning. Your task is just to find how exactly. So bishop b2 followed by c3. Well, seems to be a logical idea. You play this, and if the king captured, then c3. What I don't like here is that he can capture with the king. Of course, if he captures with the queen, you have this. Double check and you gain the queen. If he captures with the knight, you have this, which also works really well. After which you are up the exchange and one pawn, so it's a completely winning position. But if after c3 he captures with the king, I don't see any continuation because this doesn't work. So maybe just slowly develop our pieces, but then I think they can escape to d3, or I think they can also try bishop b3, rook here, king b2 seems a blunder, so king goes here. And how do you play? It looks like the king successfully escaped. If you had a dark squared bishop, let's say on c5, then the position would be extremely dangerous for white, but not now. So it's not bishop b2. It should be something else. So who can tell me? So not b3, but c3 right away. I think, Brian, this is what you meant. So c3 right away. Yeah, the key idea is not to expose the king, but to vacate the square for the knight. For example, well, pawn takes and queen takes are just blunders, because if pawn takes, this is a discovery check and the queen is lost. If queen takes, the queen is lost right away. So knight takes c3, knight c4, queen e2, and then you take here. The king has to move and you gain another piece. And continue. Well, how do you play in this position? No, looks like, okay, looks like if you gain here, you lose on c4. Okay, then we have two options. We can play a simple continuation with bishop h6, then here, and then fork, and then capture on c3, which looks good. We have a completely winning endgame. So here, where does the king goes? King goes here. Then take. And we are a piece up. Fine, perfect. If the king goes here, it's still a winning position because we can continue with a check, right? Because if the queen takes, they lose the queen. If the king goes there, who can tell me which move to play in this position? How well do you think bishop e3 works? But what if they escape? There is no checkmate, I just want you to gain the material. So I'm looking for your comments, guys. Bishop g7. Well, bishop g7 is interesting, but once you play bishop g7, what if they play knight a4, trying to chase your rook away and then capture this knight? So I don't think bishop g7 is a good move. You can play much better. Okay, guys. So people with rating 1800 and over will definitely find the move in this position. Do we have anyone who is 1800? Looks like not. Okay, let me show you. It's simply knight before there is a pin. Well, you may say, well, isn't it a blunder? No, it's not, because of knight d3 fork. Nice, right? Knight before. So where to move the knight? To create a pin and at the same time protect the rook. Knight before, because the rook is protected indirectly. Okay, so if, for example, after knight c2 the king goes somewhere else, let's say here or here or here, oh, it's impossible. So here, then it's knight a3 and we take the queen. So this is how black ends with an advantage after bishop h6. So that's why taking on c3 isn't a good idea. So queen d3 was played, c takes b2, they still cannot take it. We have a bishop and we also have some discovered ideas. If in this position we somehow bring our knight to a3 or to d2, it is a checkmate, right? So knight d4, bishop d7. We can't bring our knight right away, but we'll definitely think about it. Rook d1 and rook fc8, which seems like a inaccuracy, but at the same time this is quite a clever and logical move because it controls the c file, the rook joins the place of action, and the knight can also occupy c3. According to the engine, because I analyzed this game several times, and of course I did the analysis with the engine to double check, so here the best move was queen e6. The game in such a case would continue with bishop takes d4, rook takes d4, and then simply rook takes c2, threatening with a mate. Well, it's not a mate right away, but it can be a mate. I'll show you. So, for example, how does he play in this position? He has king c2 and rook b4. So if he does rook b4, you play with the rook here, because if he takes, this is a mate. That's why they can only take on b6. But then you play... Then you can play bishop e6. Or if you... Well, yeah, you can play rook g2. Then queen... Well, you are threatening with a mate, so they have to sacrifice the queen. Then they do this, and they gain a bishop back, but you are winning in this endgame. For a grandmaster, it's easy to exploit advantage here. However, if you, for example, don't like to pass the game to the rook endgame, you can instead continue with bishop e6, which threatens with mainly the same idea. Well, it threatens with this, and this is a mate. Well, no, let me show you. So check here, 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 And then you do this and take the queen. Maybe you can also search for a checkmate in this position. I'm not sure if it exists. But maybe it exists. Okay, anyway, it's obvious that it's winning. So bishop e6 is a better move. Well, so rook b4 fails. King takes c2 fails too, because of what? Who can tell me? How do we promote the pawn? Can we promote it right away and then apply some discovery check, maybe? Or what do you think? So bishop a4 check, and okay, bishop a4, but they can capture on b2. And do we have a good discovery check here? I doubt. Knight c4, king c3, for example. No, bishop a4, it doesn't seem to be good. What else? Okay, no suggestions. Well, here it's important to bring our knight to c3 or to d2 or to a3. So knight a4 seems like a good idea, but it doesn't work, unfortunately. If this move is played, then they continue with rook d1. And they stop our b1 move. That's why instead we'd better continue with this move, because if this time they play rook d1, we can of course capture the queen or liquidate the rook and then promote. Both options are playable. I think the simplest is just to take here and end up with two extra pieces. So even such a move like queen a6, which was recommended by the engine, doesn't allow white to save their position. So that's why Milka Bobotsov played such a move like bishop b3, which is a mistake. But, well, what else can he do? The game continued with knight a4. He took on a4, bishop takes a4. Now the rook is hanging, as well as there is an idea of doing bishop c2 with a checkmate. So knight b3. But now you enter with your rook. Finally, the queen takes on a6, bishop takes b3, a takes b3, and in this position you just need to double in order to play this move, because every time they take here you have a discovered attack. So the game continued with queen e3. It's hard to suggest anything else, but queen e3 maybe was the worst move in this position, because after that it's just a checkmate. Rook c1, rook c1, and after this move white resigned because there is a checkmate in one move. So what can we say about this game? Well, that was the moment where white thought that they gained a queen, but they underestimated the long-term attack that here black initiated on the enemy king. So also here, when knight e3 captures on c4, it seems that white is already in trouble. That's why I also think that Bobotsov didn't evaluate this position properly. He thought that he is fine after that, but with these pieces, the queen is fully compensated, even materially, even if it doesn't look at any attack. It's a rook, bishop, and a pawn for the queen, which is equal to the queen. So that was the main mistake. And then black's better pieces coordination played the most important role. So when it's a long-term attack on the enemy king, probably it makes sense to sacrifice your queen for two minor pieces, if you do not see how exactly your opponent solves the problems. If you see that he has to play accurate moves, move by move, for example, for 10 moves in a row. Okay, fine. Let's continue. Today I have two more games for you. The next game is the game between such a famous Soviet grandmaster as Rashid Nezhmedinov versus another Soviet master, Oleg Chernikov. So, well, some of you may not hear these names well, but those who are familiar with Soviet grandmasters games probably know that Rashid Nezhmedinov was known as a good tactician. He was maybe one of the best tacticians in the Soviet Union, and I watched several of his games only, but there was even a tournament in Novosibirsk where I played two times, named after him. So actually, Rashid Nezhmedinov wasn't living in Novosibirsk. If I'm not mistaken, he was from Kazan, but anyway, there was a tournament in Novosibirsk named after him. It was one of the stages of Russian Rapid Cup, and I played there twice. Both times I decreased my rapid rating, but just a little, and well, I played well. I drew several times with grandmasters there. Okay, this is one of the most famous. Okay, fine. E4, c5, knight f3, knight c6, d4. Yeah, probably this is the most famous queen sacrifice versus two minor pieces. However, I'm not sure that you remember this line. So, dragon accelerated, knight f6, bishop c4, castle, bishop b3. So we play bishop b3 because if the castle, they take on e4, and then they simplify with d5. So bishop b3 is a must. And there are a lot of moves in this position: d6, a5, knight g4, e6, queen e5 also is a possibility. So black chooses knight g4, which is not a good idea actually. Queen takes g4, knight d4, well, which is not a good idea, but I would say it's not the best line for black here. Well, here the best way to play is to do queen d1 move. At that time, people were not familiar with this variation. They didn't have engines, so instead Rashid Nezhmedinov played another move. So here, for example, knight takes b3, a takes b3. The a7 is in a danger. Of course, you cannot take it right away because your bishop can be trapped there, but you are going to take it sooner or later. So b6 probably to activate the bishop and also not lose on a7, but after bishop d4, it seems that you have a very strong attack. Like that. So that's why I actually play this position myself for white, and I would continue with queen d1, but he played queen h4. Anyway, queen a5, we'll see. Castle, bishop f6 attacking the queen. And looks like the queen doesn't have many squares to move to. Where does the queen go? So if this move, it's just a repetition. Queen g7, bishop g7 and bishop f6 back. If queen g3 move, I think it's just queen c3, pawn takes, and then knight a2, gaining the queen back and also capturing the pawn on c3. That doesn't favor white. So where white moves his queen, well, right, they have to sacrifice their queen, and they play this move. Well, most of you here immediately reacted with e takes f6, but then after bishop d4 and knight d5, it's really hard for you to defend the position. So rook d8, knight f6. If king f8, it's even knight h7. If king g7, it's f4, for example, and you use the f file. So it's a bit dangerous. That's why here, instead of taking the queen right away, black decided to play an intermediate move, knight e2, in order to distract this knight and not let white to activate their pieces too quickly. At least white would have to spend one more tempo to bring the knight to c3 and then to d5. So knight c3, rook e8, knight d5 was played, it's threatening, so rook e6. Bishop d4 anyway, king g7, the pawn seems to be protected. what do you think you should do in this position as white? The pawn is protected, right? But, well, this is a pin, and so those of you uh, who do individual classes with me know that if there is a pin and you have an option to take advantage of the pin, you should do it. And the best way is to pressure this pawn with something else. But how exactly to initiate it? Who knows? Okay, so Brian suggests g4 and then g5. Well, of course it does make sense, but don't you think that they're gonna play h6? You can play h4, but then they continue with g5. Okay, let me illustrate it. So this g5. Well, you can probably bring the knight to f5, but this is how you don't take advantage of the pin anymore because your knight is located. Yeah, okay. So then f4. Yeah, f4 makes sense because this time g4. G5 cannot be played. But the disadvantage of doing this move, even there is a disadvantage of playing h4 in this position, and even g4 was a mistake. Rook can capture here, and if knight takes, then rook takes d4. If bishop takes, then let's say king f8, and how do you continue your attack? You did capture the pawn, but how can you benefit? You lose the central pawn, and your other pawn is under the attack too. So, and if you, let's say, play f4, then rook f4 is even stronger. So bishop f6, king f8, and how to continue. That's why you have to play something else. Well, rook a1, yes, but rook ad1 was played in the game, because if now rook takes e4, then bishop takes here, king goes to f8, bishop goes back, queen goes to c5, and then, for example, knight f6, and you can capture on d7 and h7 both. So the key idea, the bishop is protected on d4, and the d knight is defended twice. So that's why the game continued with d6. Now what? You brought the rook to the d file, but how to take advantage of it? Who can tell me? Knight to c7. Well, what's the point? There is a queen there. So you cannot play this move. The queen is guarding c7. Discover the attack on the rook. Ah, wait. Well, Brian, yes, it is a discovered attack, but you can calculate that you give up two pieces here. Your knight and your bishop just for one rook. And having in mind that you already a queen down, it doesn't look like a good idea. Knight f4. Well, yes, you can play knight f4, but what's the idea of this move? They take on e4, let's say. You can bring the knight back. They bring the rook back, for example. What else? Guys, f6 is pinned. So let's increase the pressure on the piece which is pinned. This time it's a pawn on f6. So rook d3 with the idea of doing this move. They cannot really stop it. Bishop d7, rook f3. And they cannot do anything to save it. Well, they can bring the queen, but this is how they lose the queen. Bishop b5 with some counterattack. Well, the best move here was c4, which seems to be quite logical, but instead, White decided to play bishop c3 and attack the queen. So queen goes to d8, and now it's time to take on f6. Well, why taking on f6? So, well, it's easy. For example, if rook takes f6, bishop takes f6, queen takes, rook takes, they take here, but after rook d6, we are 2 pawns up, right? And if they take here, then we are 1 pawn up, but it's still winning position. Especially for people rated over 2500. So if bishop f1 first, which does make sense, then you can continue with knight g4. However, after the king goes here, how to play then? Who can tell me? Knight h6? Maybe. Knight h6, they have to move the king to f8, and then you take on f7. Yeah, it looks like a good idea. You can take on f7 with your rook, king goes to e8, and then you do what? Take here? Not sure if this is a completely winning position. So let's say bishop b5 to cover d7. And then it seems to me that you have to bring the knight to g4 or g8 to play knight f6. Queen g5, let's say, they are threatening with a mate. f4. No, f4, queen c5. Okay, if you play this move, they escape. And in this position, looks like they escape anyway. No, it doesn't look like a good idea. Maybe you can suggest anything else in this position instead of doing knight h6. Rook takes e6. I mean, I think it means bishop takes e6. Yes, and after pawn takes, it's this with a mate. So, and if the bishop goes somewhere back, I still believe it is a huge trouble. For example, it can be continued with what? Rook takes f7. Yeah, rook takes f7, because after they take on g4, we can play rook f5, and this is a mate. Okay, yeah, so it's bishop e6. Fine, so bishop takes f7 is enough. Okay, so bishop e2, bishop takes f7, king f8, and then... Because every time you move the bishop, they take here. I don't think it is enough. Well, maybe you can also do this, but then it looks similar to what we've already analyzed. So that's why the best way is to capture with the rook on f7, because then you're threatening with a mate. It can be either knight h6 or a rook to f5 or anywhere to the f file. So why I choose f5 here? Because I block this attack. Okay, fine. So knight f6 in the game it was bishop e2. Black decided that this is a more dangerous rook and it's better to liquidate it. However, then knight h7. The key idea is that if they capture, it is a mate on h8. That's why king g8. Now, maybe it makes sense to bring the knight back and then capture on f6 with the rook here, but here white played with this move. Not the best way, but still fine, with the idea of opening the h file and checkmating on h8. The game continued with rook e5, so they decided to sacrifice the exchange, but to stop this pressure. However, that's not the end. f4. Bishop f1. This position, bringing the knight to g5, was the best thing because they cannot take the knight and you are threatening to capture here as well as to continue with rook h8, for example. But white decided to take, so it's really hard to play these moves, and I mean, in such a sharp position where where a lot of lines can be played and a lot of things are required to be calculated, every move that a human player may consider logical, in fact, may be even a blunder from the engine's points of view, because the engine considers a move a blunder if it significantly changes the evaluation of the position. So white is still winning even after king f1 in this position, but white was more winning one move before if in case they played knight g5. So it makes sense to do this move, but then it's knight f6 and knight takes h5 and it's a losing position, which is quite obvious for a human player, but according to the engine it was the best move. However, black played this move, which the engine again considers to be a blunder, but their main idea is to sacrifice the exchange here to eliminate these mating ideas on h8. Again, this is a blunder by white. So you see, it's really hard to calculate, and it's mainly more about how stable your opponent is. Can he calculate everything properly, being defending his position for several moves in a row, or he is likely to make a mistake? Well, if you're playing against a club player, I don't believe that a club player will survive after you are creating 10 threats in a row. So he's likely to make a mistake, very likely to make a mistake, even if in such a position there is a way to save. He just won't be able to find it. It's really hard to make the only moves. Okay, so b5 to block the bishop on c4, but after knight g5 there is still a mating threat if the rook moves, so rook g5, for example, rook h8 mate. They played rook c7 to defend here, and well, it could make sense to continue with this move. D takes f5, bishop takes f7, rook takes f7, and rook h8, because if the king takes, knight f7 is a fork, and this is a completely winning position. So the only other move is actually this, but this move fails too, right? So it was so easy to end up with extra knight. However, instead, bishop takes f7 was played directly. Then rook h8 in this position when everything is pinned, and basically it didn't change anything significantly. But in this position, it's not extra piece, it's two minor pieces for a rook, which is actually enough to win, especially for a strong chess player. Well, I think that everyone who is 1800 will win this position without any problems, even against Magnus Carlsen. Fine, so yes, I can say that this is one of the most famous queen sacrifices. I'm not sure how familiar you are, but let's decide because of what this queen sacrifice was possible. I'm 100% sure when white initiated this queen sacrifice, it definitely wasn't home preparation. I think he made this move occasionally, and mainly by intuition, having in mind that after knight d5, after he does this, bishop d4 and knight d5, it's hard to defend the f6 pawn, and once the f6 is gone, white is likely to get to win the exchange, and this is how they get a full compensation. And if black plays properly, the position will be equal, which white is fine. Okay, so if black plays properly every time, they are able to equalize the position, and then most of the games will end in a draw. But with this queen sacrifice and this plan with knight d5 and bishop d4, white definitely gets better pieces coordination and is able to provoke black to defend their position with the only moves. That's why any mistake may result into a losing position for black. So this, d6, rook d3, bishop d7, this, and it finally resulted into a losing position. Why? Mainly because of bishop e2 move. Even bishop f1 would be still a losing move, but then white is just slightly better. So for example, knight g4, then in this position the best move is king to f8. No, wait, no, it's still losing. In this position, instead of bishop e2, they'd better play rook c8 to take here. And then, of course, white at least has a perpetual check with knight e6 combination, knight e8, knight f6 back. Or maybe this will happen. Rook c3, b takes c3, then bishop f1, and you play knight h5 in order to play this position. Well, yeah, probably that was the best way. I still think that white is better in this position because of several extra pawns. So there are two extra pawns. In fact, these pawns are doubled, white pieces are active, and the bishop on d5 would control everything. So that's why I think white is still better here, but maybe black here would save the game. Okay, fine. So we have the last game, and this game wasn't a winning game for a player who decided to sacrifice the queen for two minor pieces. It was the game between Anatoly Karpov and Garry Kasparov, played in 1990. So that time Garry Kasparov was already a winner. I mean, was already one world champion. So it was King's Indian. So Brian, today is your lucky day because two of the games are played in King's Indian. The opening that is your primary opening. So that's why there are a lot of things that you can learn. Yes, it's 1990. Yeah, I can search for more information about the game. So it was played on the 15th of October in New York, if I'm not mistaken. And I think that was a rematch. Okay, not sure, but 1990, you can definitely search for it. Yeah, the 15th of October. So it was d6 played. Well, actually, if you need this game, I can upload the PGN to the study where we usually do the analysis. But I don't like the way how black played, because black actually got a worse position, and they managed to outplay their opponent. So what you can learn from these games are just some ideas, but not the way how Garry played. So, well, in this position, people usually castle or play d5. Anatoly Karpov played bishop e3. Well, I don't like this move because the bishop becomes the object of the attack. Well, Garry reacted with bishop queen to e7. D takes e5, d takes e5, and now knight d5. So according to the theory, the main move here is queen to d6, which does make sense. Queen d6 stops bishop c5. If they play this move, they grab more space, but I don't think they can benefit of this. So queen goes to d8 this time, and if knight e5, it's simply knight takes d5, and white is a piece down in this case. But this time Gary didn't play queen d6. I don't know what he was thinking about. Okay, good question. Why did he allow knight d5? Well, to be honest, I think that you're right. White shouldn't allow knight d5. As I told you, the best reaction here is knight g4. Bishop goes to g5 because no one wants to exchange it, then f6. And if bishop goes here, then it's g5. Bishop goes to g3, knight h6, and then you are trying to play f5, but try to, well, be accurate, not blunder anything. However, after f5, you're threatening with f4, which traps the bishop. So this is how you should play. Do not follow what Gary plays. Well, allowing knight d5 is still okay. The position is not worse, but then you have to play queen d6. Queen d8 was definitely a mistake because then white gets some initiative. Bishop c5, he's threatening to take the rook. There are actually a lot of games played in this position. According to what I see, well, 13 games played by people rated 2300 plus. The most famous is by Karpov and Kasparov. There is a game played by Konstantin Sakaev, but he was playing with white pieces. Sergei Shipov, who was considered to be a very strong grandmaster in 90th, and this time, unfortunately, well, he is a good chess commentator, but unfortunately, he is also a famous Russian propagandist. He is okay. I just don't want to talk about politics. So yeah, but he was a really strong grandmaster at that time. So there was a game, but he was also playing it with white pieces. So it seems to me that among strong grandmasters, only Garry Kasparov played this line. So what's the idea? So the rook is hanging. What if we play rook e8? Who can tell me what we may expect if rook e8 is played? It seems to be logical to move the rook because it's under attack, but at the same time, rook e8 is a completely losing move. I can even mark it as a mistake. So why this is a mistake? Guys, come on, I'm waiting for your suggestions. What's wrong with it? Who knows? Oh, thank you. Thank you for a good suggestion. It's bishop e7. 100% the best move. So, of course, if the queen moves, it's either bishop f6 or knight takes f6 and white ends up with extra piece. But you may say, okay, so bishop e7, why can't I capture it with the rook? Well, you can, but then you lose your queen for one minor piece. So that's why you have to give up the exchange. Well, maybe Gary prepared it. He played knight e4. So, once Gary Kasparov said a very important thing. So he said that once when they were playing matches with Anatoly Karpov, they were making tons of mistakes and blunders, but nobody was able to judge them because that was the era with no engines. And the positions were so complicated that even strong grandmasters couldn't realize that the moves they played were mistakes. Nowadays, any amateur may analyze the game with the engine and say, oh, stupid grandmaster, how could he miss this simple thing? Of course, the thing is simple after the engine illustrates it. But are you able to find it yourself? So, what I think, so this nowadays, the engines make our life, I mean, chess engines make our life simpler. It's easy to prepare for the certain opening using the engine, but at the same time, it decreases our ability to be more creative in games. If, let's say, you spend hours analyzing the opening you played and you find some natural ideas, and so your opponent plays this opening and he doesn't know what you have prepared, he can get into trouble. But he can just once look at with the engine, and then he knows how to play against it. So that's why actually the opening theory is well developed. When I was younger and there was no engines, the opening theory was developed by grandmasters. So they did some analysis, they published sometimes it, sometimes not, and well, and this is how we were learning openings. So, for example, Gary Kasparov played Novelty, and we were repeating after him. Like Nigel Short played something, we were repeating. Okay, fine. So Bishop e7 worked well after Rook e8. That's why Knight e4, and the exchange has to be sacrificed. Here, Anatoly Karpov played intermediate move Bishop e7, which was a clever idea. The queen goes here, the bishop is blocked. Bishop f8, well, this bishop is required to protect the pawn on e5, so king takes f8. Queen c2 maybe is a bit inaccuracy, but not so serious. The knight is hanging, it goes to c5, rook d1, and knight c6, because black needs to develop their pieces. Such a move definitely blunders a discovered attack, which is knight b6. However, Anatoly Karpov didn't play this move right away. He first decided to castle, and after knight e6, which was actually a mistake, instead we'd better block with knight d4 and play without exchange. But Kasparov decided to sacrifice the exchange. So he sacrificed the queen. He sacrifices the queen for the knight and the rook. But having in mind that he already sacrificed the exchange on f8, he has two minor pieces and the pawn versus queen. So white is just very slightly better. But why this sacrifice makes sense for black? I mean, can you please identify which benefits does black get in this position that can potentially compensate the queen? So who can tell me? What are these features of the position which may tell us that maybe two minor pieces and the pawn are enough to compensate the queen? Because there is no direct attack on the enemy king, for example, right? Okay, so Hanif thinks that there is a bishop pair. Well, yes, bishop pair, right, but bishop pair is just a very little. Open a file, so okay. Pressure on a2. Okay, clever. Knight b4 is a possibility. Okay, knight b4 is a possibility, right? But okay. Okay, let me explain it. So first of all, there is the d4 square, which is available for our pieces. Second, f5 e4 is coming, which means that the knight goes away and we can control the center. We can control the d4, and maybe based on a coordination of our pieces on d4, we'll create something else. a2 is hanging. It is important too, but okay, yeah. So, but it's easy to defend this pawn. What else? Yes, it's a bishop pair. But when we play f5 and e4, look at this bishop, it becomes terrible. And actually the knight doesn't have many squares. So these pieces become passive, and this is the most important thing, and it's likely to happen after f5 and d4. Then we get the control over the d4 square, maybe the bishop pair, and the pressure on e2 as two very last options, very last benefits. Okay, the game continued with queen d2. They are threatening to take here, maybe. Why I say maybe? Because after queen d7 there is this move, rook d8, and the queen is trapped. So right now the bishop is not hanging, but bishop e8 was played anyway. b3, protecting the pawn. e4. So if you can play e4 right away, then you should play e4. So now I want you to imagine that you are Anatoly Karpov playing with white pieces, and this is a world championship match, a rematch. So if you want to get your title back, you have to defeat uh, younger prodigy. Well, I don't think Gary was considered to be a prodigy at his age that time, but he was definitely the strongest chess player. Uh, so, well, you need to play for a win. You have extra queen, but black has some compensation. So, what do you think you should do as white here? Who knows? Well, no, nobody knows, of course, but who can guess? Activate pieces, create threats. Well, okay. So I'm asking what white should do while their knight is hanging. So I wanted you to answer a concrete move or a concrete plan. Yes, so activating pieces is a must in this position, but well, you need to save the knight. So where do you play with the knight? So Hanif suggests knight g5. Please explain knight g5, because knight g5 blunders the pawn on a2. By the way, guys, while you're thinking, I have another question for you. What do you think if my webinars are too complicated? So because, well, uh, let's say we could, for example, talk about development, about open files, about some simple plans in the end games, for example. But instead, we are analyzing such a specific thing like a queen sacrifice for two minor pieces, which may happen, but I'm sure not every one of you is ready to sacrifice the queen for two minor pieces, even if he sees that there is initiative. So maybe this is too complicated, and it does make sense to um, do a webinar on a more simple topic, and it's likely to attract more people. Yeah. So So why do I demonstrate such complicated things? Because they are also interesting for me myself. Because, well, simple things, okay, I can explain simple things if I well, because I have a desire to teach, like a passion of teaching, but I also have a passion of playing chess and learning something new for me. So that's why we are doing some complicated things like a queen sacrifice. Well, and another positive mm, thing of doing such webinars is that when it comes to imbalanced position, is a lot of tactics. That means that the game we analyze are well, are quite exciting to watch, and at the same time force you to calculate the lines and look for tactics, which improves your ability to calculate, of course. Okay, so knight g5 is the right move, but Hanif didn't explain it. So what else to play? Knight e1 is the only other move, because I don't see the point of having the knight on h4 where it doesn't do anything. So knight e1 at least has a prospect of moving to c2 later in the game, which actually happened. But knight e1, bishop e2, and the rook trapped here are very passive. That's why it could make more sense to simplify by doing knight g5. So knight g5, queen g5, rook a2, bishop goes there, knight goes to d4, but then the queen probably enters the black's camp and tries to attack some pawns. So with knight g5, white of course sacrifices the pawn, but at least improve other pieces. The rook is no longer trapped, it can move to e1, for example. The queen gets more freedom. So that's why sacrificing another pawn, but getting some counterplay could make sense. Because if they play knight e1, they are completely stuck, and it's hard to get these pieces coordinated. f5, bishop d1, and knight goes to e5. In this position, Anatoly Karpov made a significant mistake. He played knight c2 and gave up the pawn on e2. I can explain why he did it. But even if he didn't, but for example continued with a random move king h1, it's still rook here, queen c1, and after f4, bishop c2, then maybe rook d4. If f3, it's e3. So the position doesn't look good for white, and maybe because of that, because he saw how black could activate their pieces, he decided to sacrifice this pawn and apply for a counterplay. First of all, if he does queen d5 right away, it is a blunder. You just play rook d8, queen e6, bishop f7, and the queen is trapped. So he has to give up it either for the bishop or for the knight. And then it's a completely winning position, at least because of the black piece's activity and extra pawn on e4. That's why he played knight c2. Because now if rook takes a2, he thought that he is fine with queen d5. But actually queen d5 was still a mistake. Why? Well, king e7 was played in the game, and this knight is not hanging, and the pawn is not hanging too. Because if white does it, the queen is simply trapped. Now he has to give up the queen for the rook. And then white has a rook versus two minor pieces and the pawn, which is completely losing position. That's why instead he finds his last chance. He plays knight b4, attacking the rook. Well, here black continues with c6. The queen is trapped. Queen takes e6, king takes e6, knight e2. And black is down the exchange, but for this exchange, black has a full compensation because of two pawns. Also, their pieces are better coordinated, and they are potentially playing for a win. Unfortunately, Gary couldn't win this game because white was defending quite well. But let's take a look at what happened. So knight f7. Well, the knight goes to a better square, and also we take this square from the knight. Knight d6, knight b4, bishop c3. The knight has to go back. F4. rook d1, h5 to stop bishop g4 activity, f3, e3, g3 undermining, of course g5, bishop goes to d3. And this is where he plays h4 move to decide this problem, to define the pawn structure and to force them to take either here or on h4. However, king f1, because if we take here, then the pawn on e3 is lost. So here black continued with c5 to control these two squares, which seems like a logical idea, but maybe activating their bishop was a better idea. So here, like that. Getting all pieces coordinated was a better idea. However, c5, well, seems logical, but not flexible. King e2 and b5. So he wanted to open the position this way, and with c5, he also stopped the c4 pawn. C takes b5, knight takes b5, bishop goes to c4. Well, so taking with the bishop isn't a good idea because black has a bishop pair. King e7, and unfortunately that activity was enough to get their pieces, the white pieces, activated. So rook d5, this pawn is hanging, this pawn is hanging too. That's why we need to save the one on g5, because it protects the f4 pawn, and f4 at the same time protects the pawn on e3. So rook c5, knight checks, king goes there, and bishop g6. Now the knight has to move. What do you think black should do in this position in order to play for a win? Bishop f7. Okay, so yeah, it's quite a logical move. So the key idea of bishop e7 is that once the bishop takes, it's e2, and after the king goes here or here, it's bishop d4, king g2, then bishop c5, and it seems to be winning because of this extra pawn. But the problem is that bishop f7 actually loses the game because they have this move, rook c7. Now, if king d8, it's just simply rook f7, and you cannot play e2 because the bishop still covers it. If you play king e8, it's slightly better, but then here, king goes there, and in this position you can take here, or you can just take here, which in my opinion is the simplest way. Look at the position, just extra knight and for a pawn, and king e2 successfully stops the pawn. So white is winning. That's why, well, pawn to b5 here. Does it make any sense? So what if I just take this? Because once you take, there is no bishop d3 this time. And e2 still doesn't make sense. So it's not pawn to b5. It's king d6, the move that was played in the game. Rook a5, f takes g3. Well, maybe this is a mistake. Instead, it could make sense for, I don't know actually, because the position still looks very drawing, because white has enough defense and I don't see a clear plan of how to win. So f takes g4, h takes g4, the pawns are isolated now. So, well, actually, maybe here black would have a chance to win the game if they play bishop d4. But if they play bishop d4 right away, it's rook g5, and these two pieces are hanging. That's why g4 first, f takes g4, and then bishop d4, because this time rook g5 doesn't make much sense. And then, yes, at some point you're threatening with something like that, and e2, and then bishop f2, and maybe white wouldn't survive here, especially if they make any mistake. But Gary played b5, rook a6, king e7, and the position became drawing very quickly. Rook a7, king e8, rook e8, bishop d8, knight takes on e3, looks like now black obtained some advantage, right? So two minor pieces for a rook. But white is threatening to do this and to take advantage of the pin. G4. So the idea is to play this, because if the king takes, it's bishop e4, and the rook is lost. And this is a winning position. With three minor pieces versus knight and two pawns, it's completely winning. And if king goes there, then it's knight e2, I think. No, knight e2 doesn't work. Actually, something similar happened. Yeah, it seems to be drawing anyway. Okay, anyway, king g2 seems to be a better move because he also attacks the pawn on g3. Knight e2 was played. Knight to e5, as I said, so this is the idea. G takes f3, king takes f3, and g2. And then after the last move, which is rook d8, they agreed to a draw. Well, rook d8 is played because if this move, then bishop e4, king f2, bishop a8, king takes e2. It's still drawing, but some accurate play is required from white because it's hard to fight against the bishop pair. And at some point, the knight can be lost. There probably can be some Zugzwang ideas. But after rook d8, the bishop is liquidated, and then king takes g2. So with bishop and knight, you won't checkmate if your opponent has a knight. That's why in this position they agreed to a draw. So I don't want to repeat the way how Gabry played the King's Indian. So I don't want you to play queen e7 here, follow knight g4, which is a better line. But here, this sacrifice of the queen versus two minor pieces did make sense because of the black's activity f5, e4. So the pawn structure really defined who will be defending the position and who will play for a win. And it's definitely black who is playing for a win, even despite the fact that they are down a queen for two minor pieces and the pawn. F5, e4 led to such a situation where the white pieces were passive. This is a weakness, and here black totally dominated in the center with these moves. So if you see that you get a center domination, the enemy pieces are passive, then you may analyze a queen sacrifice for two minor pieces. If not, then you'd better look for something else, probably something positional, which improves your position in generally. Okay, fine, guys. So we are done for today. It was a longer webinar. I believe the quality of our video wasn't so bad today, and there were not so many frames dropped. Well, next time I would like to try Zoom, and probably I will stream Zoom to some platforms too. Any questions? Any suggestions? Okay, so looks like the quality was good after our webinar restarted in the very beginning. Okay, fine. So yeah, a bit complicated. So, well, you can add me as a friend on chess.com. So if you want, of course. Oh, by the way, I changed Argentinian flag to the United States. However, I am still in Argentina. I just changed the flag because this is how I am likely to get more messages in English instead of Spanish, because people are messaging me in Spanish thinking that I'm a native Argentinian, but I'm not fluent at Spanish, and I just know a little. However, I'm still learning it. So this is the link to my profile. If you are not in my friend list, you can add me there. Well, what do you think about our next sessions? I have some other topics for you that I've already prepared, but maybe it makes sense to play a simultaneous exhibition or maybe a blitz event. Maybe simul is a good idea because I see many people want to play against me, so maybe simul looks good. We didn't play simuls for a very long period of time. Yeah, true. So Victor through C letter is quite a popular name in Spanish-speaking community. That's true. But actually, my last name, which is Newstroev, isn't popular, and it definitely tells people that I'm from former Soviet Union. However, not all of them know about this, so that's why they may consider me to be an Argentinian. Well, but I'm still not, and I speak Spanish a little. Okay, fine. So, guys, see you next weekend, and let me think whether it will be a simul or we're gonna do a webinar devoted to another important topic, but I'm sure next time it will be definitely in Zoom. Okay, so we are over for today.